Derek Wheatley, and welcome to episode 181 of the Weekly Wheatley podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in wherever you are doing so. A big thank you to Claire Griffin, who came on last week to talk about being an artist and then becoming a tattoo artist and the meaning of tattoos, why they're so popular, why she got tattoos of her own. And we went into a little bit of a conversation about all that. Obviously, I'm speaking from a point of view where I have absolutely no tattoos, so that was. I'm always good being at this time. I'm always good being outside of my depth. But it was a great chat, so go check it out. Join us. You can support us. Sorry, on Buy Me a Coffee if you like. Link is always in the description. Everything is appreciated and put back into the podcast. Usually on books for guests, books that guests have written, and I get to read them and at least have some sort of knowledge on what I'm supposed to be asking people. If you want to check out another podcast, by the way, Lucky Works podcast, my friend Josh's podcast that I am also on, and it's on episode, what's it on? Episode 5. So they're all there in the podcast platform, on the podcast platforms. Try and get my words right. So this episode is called 9 Events That Changed Everything. I had to go through a couple of changes on the title, really, because I had 9 moments, then I had 9 things, and then I had changed to events. And I think events is a more appropriate word to use. I thought it'd be nice to do a little bit of a solo episode in between guests, even though every time I do a solo episode, I think that's the last time I'm doing a solo episode. So this time, hopefully I won't say it after I record this episode. So when I talk about the 9 events, there's 2 things that I'm not going to talk about. And the reason I'm not going to talk about them because they've been covered so many times on this podcast. So I'm not going to talk about the Beatles because I've mentioned the Beatles numerous times. They are, as art goes, the most important, entity that have been in my life, in regards to obviously falling in love with music. But, when they came along, it was different. And then as I was reading about the Beatles, I got to read more about the 60s, and I got into music of the 60s, films of the 60s, and I went from there. So I'm not going to talk about the Beatles because we've covered them. They would obviously be in this list otherwise. Another thing I'm not going to talk about is 12 Angry Men. I've talked about it ad nauseum, but the event that, watching 12 Angry Men with my dad, and it got me into films and got me to appreciate films a lot more. And I went from there with my, becoming a little bit more sophisticated with my film choices. So I'm not going to mention 12 Angry Men. So there are 2 things that are taken out that would have been in there. I thought it only right. I'm doing this chronologically. It will be easier to follow, I suppose. Otherwise, if I'm jumping around a bit, it gets a bit messy and things like that. So I'm also not going to say something like number 1, my birth, obviously, because these are events that I was, fully aware of happening. So put it that way. There's a line in one of my favorite Nirvana songs, if not my favorite Nirvana songs, called "Serve the Servants," and the line is that legendary divorce is such a bore. All right. Now, my parents didn't get divorced; they separated, but they didn't technically get divorced. But the line, as far as Kurt Cobain is talking about, was how critics would talk about, once he became famous, people started dipping into his private life and realizing that his parents were divorced when he was quite young. And then trying to go back and analyze lyrics and figure out where he had spoken about the divorce, or even in interviews when he was asked questions about it, how it had affected his life. And to him, it became obviously a bore, as he said. So every time I went to therapy, I was asked about this, or when it was discovered in therapy, when I talked about it, like, this kind of something that a therapist would cling on to. Like, why is this? Um, is this the thing that kind of affected him immediately from the beginning and maybe set off something else? And I mentioned this to my mom the other day about putting this down in the list because, you know, it does have an effect, but it doesn't quite have the effect I think that some people might think it has. So when I look back on that time when I was, between 6 and 8, I mean, I know I moved to Dublin when I was 8, but like the separation had kind of begun before that. And I think I was too young really for it to affect me then, because I didn't really know what was going on. Now when we moved to Dublin, then we had this kind of a situation where we move, or sorry, travel down every 3 weeks, and then for holidays and stuff like that. And I always had the kind of feeling when I got to about 10 or 11, when I started to realize that it wasn't as prevalent then, like separations and stuff like that. For whatever reason, uh, the Catholic Church, I know, but it was weird to leave a parent behind each time, and I was projecting my feelings on my parents. So I was thinking like, oh God, how devastated they must be to not see us now for 3 days or for the holidays and stuff like that. And like, I see when we were leaving with my mom, my dad would be like wave us off or whatever. And I was like, oh God, he's going to be devastated now for, and that was just projecting my own thing on top of it. Obviously, as I got older, like it became less and less. But there was moments where Christmas is together and stuff like that, where it was a bit strained, and then you start to notice how difficult it is for parents to, have to spend time together. Like if you think of it just as someone maybe who broke up with people before, not been married. I mean, just went out with someone for a year and broke up, and then having to share that, making sure that the rest of your life is being shared with someone that you didn't want to be with in the first place because you've got kids with them. And I'm sure loads of people listening to this have this situation. And how difficult it is to try and make it all look all happy and rosy when really you don't want to be there, around the person that you separated from. So that started to kind of, it became noticeable. And then, family dynamics shift all the time. Then it becomes like less to do with the parents, and you kind of get in a routine. But what I do find a little bit, and I guess a little bit annoying about it, is the fact that I don't really feel comfortable mentioning my dad in front of my mom, and then vice versa. And it's just that's kind of something that is disappointed to me, that I can't share these moments of like the two most important people in your life, your parents. You can't share kind of certain moments because you feel, oh, I don't want to mention that this was with my dad or this was with my mom. And that's the only thing that kind of still maybe makes me feel a bit strange, I suppose. But, you know, I mean, if I think of it, so I've moved to Dublin when I was 8 and I'm 41 now, like it's like 33 years ago. Has it affected me a huge amount? It's affected me a small bit, but it's not as life changing, I think, as some might imagine. And maybe it's because of my age at the time when it happened. If I was 15 or 16 and realizing everything that was going on around me, it might be something different then for me. So I felt like I needed to put it in here, because it is a point in someone's life where, two of their most important people separate, and then it becomes two different stories in your life. But at the same time, I'm glad they did, because when you think of all the people who's had to stay together, maybe 20 years before that, maybe in the 50s and 60s or whatever it was, they had to stay together because of the Catholic Church. But but they had, because they were expected to stay together and just get through things, but then be miserable with it. So I'm glad that they didn't decide to go down that route, because who wants their parents to be miserable? And as that great quote in Talladega Nights goes, when the two kids find out that the parents are separating, they shout out, "Two Christmases." So there you go. The second one for me, I told someone about this the other day, and they were shocked by this being such an important event in my life. But this really was groundbreaking. When you love music. Even when I was like hanging around my brother, my older brother, and him and his friends were already kind of into music, and I remember it being Guns N' Roses, Metallica, and just being, I had the tapes, Guns N' Roses, Metallica tapes, and I used to listen to them all the time, and I was thinking like that was my music, but I was so young, and I think of it now, like I hope it still happens to kids that young when they realize how important music can be, and you know how it can maybe bring them out of their shell and things like that. Um, and kind of you catch on to other art forms through it. But so I was listening to all this, and then I remember it so distinctly. My brother coming in with a tape cassette, and it was a record. It wasn't an original, we'll say, so it was recorded onto this blank tape. And he gave me this tape, and he said, I don't really like this all that much, but you should, maybe you listen. I don't remember the story, but I remember exactly where we were standing in our first like house in Dublin, and he put it on the mantelpiece, and it was Nirvana's Nevermind album. Um, and I remember like listening to it, and I was 10 years of age. It was like early 1992 because it came out in late 1991, and I know it wouldn't have been that quick that I got the recorded cassette. So it was late 90, or early 1992, and I remember listening to it. So I would have been 9, coming on 10 at the time, and I just thought like it just blew me away. And I think when I heard that Nirvana album, all of a sudden Metallica and Guns N' Roses sounded different. It didn't, they didn't resonate as much. It almost sounded dated, if that makes any sense. And like I was 10 years old, I wasn't thinking in those terms, but I wasn't thinking, oh, they're very dated now. I was hardly that sophisticated as a young child. I listened to music. I'm still not sophisticated listening to music, but I remember the Kurt Cobain's voice was so distinct. I remember I've since heard Nirvana described as the Beatles with distortion, and Kurt Cobain as a child was really into the Beatles, so it makes sense. But he had a real gift for melody and obviously for songwriting. But so I no, this is pre-internet, kids. All right, so we were drip fed news. MTV News was really where you get any kind of updates about your favorite bands and things like that. But Nirvana at the time then were blowing up because Smells Like Teen Spirit. So I might have heard Smells Like Teen Spirit before I got this tape cassette, but I remember listening to like In Bloom, and I was too young to realize what the songs were about. So as I was kind of getting older, and they had a Incesticide came out, that was kind of B-sides and rarities kind of collection. But then In Utero came out, and I was just like, this is like better than Nevermind. Blue Nevermind out of the water for me. Like I really like Nevermind, by the way. I'm just think In Utero is a far superior album, far like dirtier and stuff. And I'd gone back and listened to Bleach, and people talk about Nirvana as grunge, like, and grunge is obviously like any other genre is a made up word, and then people are stuck together. I don't believe there is a grunge sound. Now, what they may have been trying to throw these bands together from Seattle, Washington, like Bleach would be, if you hear someone's definition of grunge, Bleach is their only album that kind of falls under that definition, I think, because Nevermind is much more cleaner and poppy, but then Utero goes off in a completely different direction, all kind of crazy. So I started listening to, you know, when I got a tape, a VHS tape now, and it was called Live Tonight Sold Out, and I remember watching it, and it was a concert video. It was a concert video of Nirvana, and then little interviews in between, and little montages and things like that. And I genuinely did think that Kurt Cobain was the coolest person on the planet. Just that, like, because you always see these bands, and if you talk about metal bands like Guns N' Roses and Metallica, they were, all black, long hair, um, you know, kind of, I wouldn't say image orientated, but there was a certain, even though they mightn't want you to know this, there was a certain image that they like to portray. Whereas Kurt Cobain was like, I suppose it's an image in itself, but cut jeans, real baggy jumpers, blonde hair all over his face, just screaming like a guy for, his size and stature, being able to get that noise out of him is incredible. I just thought the way he played guitar, like every time he played a solo, they were kind of anti solos because they didn't stick to scales or anything. And sometimes he'd hit the wrong note and just stay on it. Or sometimes his guitar was out of tune and he'd just leave it out of tune. And it was this imperfections that kind of maybe drew me to it. And, he had this amazing, I found out this afterwards and I could kind of go back and listen to lyrics and stuff. If you listen to the lyrics of In Bloom, he talks about he's the one who likes all his pretty songs and he likes to shoot his gun and he likes to sing along, but he don't know what it means. And it's about those frat boys in the audience who bash into people and that he used to hate that kind of macho image, like, Metallica and Guns N' Roses. And I guess that's why he went into a bit of an argument with Axl Rose before. But he stood on, these topics of, gay rights and he was a feminist. And I suppose everything that I would like to think I am. Uh, so maybe, getting drawn to someone like that was a positive thing for me, and to realize that these images, these people that you hold in your head as your heroes, maybe that's a bit too strong of a word, but definitely like you look up to them in their work. And I wanted to play the guitar when I heard Kurt Cobain, and I mean that's a pretty strong thing for someone to give you, that you wanted to change and learn uh, an instrument because of them. And like I can never play guitar like Kurt Cobain. Well, I only play acoustic guitars these days, so I definitely couldn't now. Although, if you want to listen to a stripped back version of Nirvana, Unplugged in New York is one of the greatest live albums of all time, and you really get to hear his voice as something that can be as melodic as anyone, and then be as powerful. Going into something like Where Did You Sleep Last Night, as a cover of a Lead Belly song they did, which is incredible. When he took his own life, sadly, uh, I found out about it. My brother told me, and not in the nicest way did he tell me, but he told me, and I thought I didn't. It took me about 6 weeks to realize, oh, that. Does that mean there's no more Nirvana music? And that was selfishly like a thing for me, rather than thinking about the man himself. But we always are a bit selfish when we think that something that we love is taken away from us. That music that they gave. But the good thing about everything's there. I have it in CDs, MP3s, whatever it is. I go back and just listen to the power of those songs, and kind of it brings me back to the time when I was a bit clueless when it comes to music. And I did hear Nirvana before the Beatles, so they are still the second most important band of my lifetime. So so yeah, so parent separations, check. Separation, Nirvana, check. Party, drinking, drugs. I think everybody would have this as part of like events in your life, that your first time you do it, you change. I remember the first time I drank, I drank a naggin of something called 2020, which I don't know if it's still sold now, but it was kind of, I suppose, like a vodka thing with a flavoring. And I remember I was thinking of the pineapple. I don't even like pineapple, but I was given that. I remember drinking. I was 13, I think, or 14. I think it was 13, but I remember drinking it and kind of thinking, oh, should something else happen? But I do remember lying on the grass, which was a football field. It was in the summer and it was dark, and so it's obviously late. And I remember just like the stars were moving, and I was kind of going, do these always move? I don't know. But, I don't know if I left a lasting impact that initial time I did it, but definitely when you start to drink more, that sense of escapism um, becomes more and more appealing, I suppose. And I clung to that a little bit too much. And then it helps with communication as well. Like if you're in a large crowd, or even when you're old enough to start going to pubs or nightclubs. And I was going when I was 16. I was using my brother's ID, and like communication became easier. I don't think I was going around chatting to people and flirting with the ladies and doing things like that. But I think I was able to kind of loosen up a little bit. And you know we don't realize when I'm that age that there's anxiety issues and stuff like that. But I do know that, yeah, I think alcohol helped oil the hinges. And then the first time smoking hash, it wouldn't have been weed. We didn't have that much money, our group of friends, but we were down the we used to call it the Jacko, but it was like a valley in Swords, Um, and we were on a lunch break, and we went back after it, and I think it was a transition year, maybe it was a year before, and I was like, God, this feels very odd. I hope nobody asks me any questions now and allows me to sit and stew in this nice feeling. It was a nice feeling. And then we started to I used to go to my friends and we started to smoke bongs out in Rush on the beach. And, uh, I remember being at a party at my friend's house and it was a house they had by the beach. And I was sitting there and there was a girl in the toilets and she was kind of pulling a whitey. So she basically smoked too much. And I was in the other room in one of the bedrooms and there was like loads of people in the house, like where they came from. And I remember looking at my tracksuit bottoms and like they were kind of those shell kind of things, those kind of that fabric was kind of slidey. And I remember looking at this hole in the tracksuit bottoms on my thigh, and I was kind of going, That's strange. I've never seen that before." And then I didn't realize, but it was a hot rock off the hash that was burning through the tracksuit bottom onto my skin. So then I copped on, and yeah, I managed to put out the fire on my leg. But you go on to things like um other drugs, but like weed, for instance, something that's a completely different kind of high. But it's just pure escapism, and that's the worst thing about it though, because you do keep reaching for that because you realize like, oh, either I don't think it was I don't like myself, but I says I don't like how I feel a lot of the time. I had no word for it at the time, so I didn't like feeling this kind of sense of nervousness and discomfort around people, and to go to the pub, like drink 3 or 4 bottles of beer before you go. So then you're kind of already in that kind of jolly mood where you're not feeling that anxiety. And the last time I ever smoked, actually, funny enough, I was in Harvey's when I was in Athlone. Excuse me, I'll just have a drink. And we were having a few drinks at the bar. There was a few of us. There was like 6 or 7 of us. And my friend, my friend says, I have this if you want to go out and smoke it. And I hadn't smoked in a while since before that, so I hadn't given it up. But at the same time, I kind of moved away from it a little bit. So I said, yeah, I'll go and smoke it. It was just like a one Skinner thing. It wasn't like a proper joint. It was just. And I was wasted. I don't know what was in it. And I remember sitting at the bar and just feeling so paranoid. That was the last time I smoked because I felt terrible. And I don't even know if I really ever liked smoking weed or anything like that. But I do know that I just liked how that escapism was available there at all times. And then we know the story of, and this will kind of, we'll get into the what happens later on. But like I did start to rely on drink, and then yeah, I had to face those facts too. But that was a little bit further down the line. The next event, Radiohead gig, Punchestown Racecourse, the year 2000. We get on a bus there, and or sorry, Dublin bus. We're putting on you know basically a fleet of buses to get people in and out of Punchestown. So our driver decided to drive to Ferryhouse, and turns up at Ferryhouse, and there's nobody there, strangely enough, because the concert wasn't there. So he had to turn around. Now, it kind of made a cool moment, though. We were all frustrated. I remember being on the bus, and someone made a comment. He's lucky this isn't a bus full of Metallica fans. It wrecked the place, which is probably a bit unfair. Metallica fans, an unfair stereotype. But so we got to Punchestown, and Radiohead were playing in this big tent, and at the time they weren't. It was called the no logo tour after the Naomi Klein book No Logo, about advertising and stuff like that. And Tom York got into the idea of not advertising things, so he had it in this tent anyway. Now, strange enough, outside the tent there was a row of the Heineken posters because somebody's got to pay. There's always has to be somebody's getting paid, but so we're walking to the kind of not turnstiles, but where the people are ready to like check in, and nobody's around at this stage because it's getting, the time is ticking on. And all of a sudden, if people know Radiohead, the national anthem's bass line, now this is a Radiohead song called the national anthem. This isn't a Ron Navian's bass line kicking in, but all of a sudden this bass line kicks in, and we're thinking like, oh, we can't wait. Like, so we're all trying to give you one the ticket, and we're trying to get through, and, blah, 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 and we run up anyway. So we get in there, we're kind of halfway through the national anthem. And I can honestly say that this was like the greatest, easily the greatest concert I've ever been to. I'm very lucky to have been to some amazing concerts. This was unbelievable from start to finish. Me and my friend Bones, we stood at the back. The other lads who were with us kind of went up right up to the front. Radiohead at the time had changed into a slightly different band. Like they were guitar orientated before it, but then out of nowhere they became this electronic band, and it was like I recently saw it described as the greatest left turn in music history. And then putting it up there with Bob Dylan going electric moments, like iconic moments like that. And this concert was just like everything. It was almost like I'd never seen them live. I was a huge fan of OK Computer, their album, and Kid A was their album that they were touring at the time. And I was still kind of getting to grips with the idea of this band that I knew as a rock band were now a rock slash electronica band. But it was like there were aliens on stage. I didn't know what was going on. Like the drummer was playing the drums, okay, but then there was drum beats along with it, electronic beats, which sounded strange to me because I hadn't seen any of that before in concerts. I hadn't been to that many concerts at the time. Um, and the bass player was playing the bass, and the odd time he's playing a little keyboard as well. But then Johnny Greenwood, who's the guitarist, was playing it's an instrument called the Owen Martineau. I won't describe it now, but you can look it up. Ondes Martineau. That's as it sounds. He was playing a radio at one point. He had this massive board of switches and knobs and stuff he was turning and making these crazy sounds. He was doing everything. Sometimes the other guitarist, that O'Brien, was on his like sitting cross-legged on the floor, like in a yoga position, just messing around with a pedal board. Tom York, at one point, he was singing a song called "Climbing Up the Walls," and he was singing into the guitar, like into the hollow, the hole in the guitar, and then an acoustic guitar. He was doing this mad dancing that I'd never seen him do because he was normally, kind of stock still on stage. Just aliens on stage. And I thought to myself, like, I desperately want to be in a band. Like, how cool does that look? Like, I've said already on this podcast, the Beatles, Nirvana, Radiohead come third as the most important band. That concert made sure of that. I've seen them twice since then. They've been amazing. But that concert, the people at it, the communal event that every concert is, but everybody was like in on this, like a tribal thing, which I hadn't felt before and probably really haven't felt at other concerts since, But I didn't know what they were doing on stage, but I wanted to do it. And I did sort of I have been in bands since then, and I've played on stage in pubs, but still, it was exciting. We didn't play electronic music, but it really, unfortunately, I can't go to gigs that much because of how they make me feel beforehand. The build up is the worst part. But if I could get one more gig like that, that was so special. Like, I was 18. I would have turned 18. Um, it was just everything. Like, and I did, like I said, I did start bands. I did play Radiohead songs in bands. We never had the equipment to play their post Kid A stuff, but it was, yeah. I mean, it was all worth it. Like, whatever stresses had come before it, leading up to it, uh, everything was worth that gig. And, being there with my friends, in particular Bones, because I spent the whole concert with him. I remember standing and we were on these big stones, like these really big stones, not pebbles, proper stones. I don't think you get to do that now. Maybe you would, I don't know, because of the safety kind of stuff. But like, they didn't come into play or anything. Obviously, nobody's going to throw stones on the stage, but it was just something I noticed at the time. But it was just, yeah, it was incredible. So that was one that was a kind of an earthquake sized moment. Um, so like I say, I was playing in bands, and I remember we were in a band, and this moment or event is about me stopping singing in front of people for a long time. Um, One day we were due to play. My friend owned a bar in town. His dad owned the bar, River S. People will know it of my vintage, and we were allowed to rehearse there on a Tuesday night. So because it wasn't busy, but there'd be a few people there, and we'd mess up songs and stuff like that. But I think they got it pretty quickly what we were doing, that it wasn't a full on gig, so we were figuring stuff out. So it was really weird. It's like, if you've ever been a band in a practice room, think of that in a quite a big pub in Athlone overlooking the Shannon, and there's people just coming in and out. It was kind of weird. There was one moment where I was playing. This wasn't the same night, but we were further down at the back of the pub, and me and my brother was in the band, and there was a couple of other boys, a couple of other lads in the band on bass and drums, and I played a bit of guitar. I was the singer, and I played the keyboards. But we were playing "Smile Like You Mean It" by the Killers, and there's a certain keyboard part, and the chef just walked straight through. I don't think he even realized when he did it, straight through my wire and plugged the keyboard out, and just went, dude. But yeah. So anyway, we were playing that night. Um, I had gone to play football a few hours beforehand out in the AstroTurf pitches, five-a-side, and it was so foggy that day. And I remember I left the match, went home. I was living on my own time. Went home, had a shower. I even remember eating some turkey meatloaf that my dad had given me a couple of days before from the Sunday, and I warmed it up and I ate that, and I was having this cough, and I didn't realize stupidly that when you do play in something like fog, you breathe that in, and it affected my lungs, and my throat and my larynx, or whatever you call them, whatever the technical word is, like that. Excuse me. So I turned up with a cough, and I was really struggling to sing some of the songs to kind of hit the high notes. Now, I picked most of the songs because I had to pick them around my voice. I stayed away from high notes. I wasn't going to go sing "High and Dry" or something by Radiohead or something, anything like that. So I was really struggling to sing. So I was kind of singing bits and pieces and letting the lads then play like little kind of musical parts, solos, and just kind of jamming along with each other. Because look, we were practicing for kind of bigger gigs along down the line, proper gigs in proper evenings, like a Friday or Saturday. And I was coughing, and I was sitting there, and I was really starting to get pissed off with myself more than anything. This drunk lady, I'll just have a drink for her. That's for you, drunk lady. But so she comes up and she's like, starts giving me advice on how to sing. And I was kind of thinking, at the first time she said it, I wasn't being a dick or anything. I was just saying, okay, thanks. Yeah, yeah. So I sat down and the lads were playing. I tried to sing again. I just couldn't get anywhere near where I wanted to get with some of the songs. I couldn't hit certain notes. And the more you think about it, then the less chance you are of hitting it, because you start to doubt yourself, and you're not getting near it. I was getting so pissed off. And she kept coming up then. And I found out afterwards that I think she was like a choir singer or a head of a choir or whatever it was. So she kind of knew what she was talking about with regards to voice. But she was really doing my confidence a lot of damage. And I started to kind of resent her, which is unfair. She's drunk. Look, she probably shouldn't have been getting involved, but she was probably trying to help in the way only a drunk person can. And I started to resent her. I started to resent being in the band. I started to resent, literally, this is, people might be thinking, oh, catastrophizing again, but yeah, that's exactly what I was doing, because I thought, well, I don't want to be in a band. I can't sing. This is crap. If these are the songs I picked and I still can't sing them, what am I going to be able to sing ever? And this grew in my head, and I remember when we finally finished up. Now, at this point, I think I was still smoking at the time. Yeah, it would have been. And, which is always a great idea when you can't hit the notes, go out and have a fag. But I went out for a cigarette. My brother came out, and I said, that's it. I'm not singing with her around. I'm not singing anymore. I don't want to sing in this band. This is crap. And he was like, I'll just relax, the way. I don't think we played as a band after that. I certainly didn't sing in public after that for a very long time, until I started doing the stuff I do on Instagram and Facebook every so often. And I hope that explains why, when people say to you, and not many people say this, but a couple of people have said, why do you do those things on Instagram? That's my comfort zone. that's I should say that's me being outside of my comfort zone, and we all kind of need to be outside our comfort zone. And it's not like I push it every. It's not like I push to be outside of my comfort zone every day. You know, I come here and I go. I'm in my house. I go to the gym. Maybe I go into town, which is not, which is a little bit outside of my comfort zone. But singing on front of people on Instagram and going in, and people who followed the podcast for a long time. Someone like Joanne, for instance. Like, I'm not going to use my parents obviously as well, but Joanne will see that. I know she listens to the podcast, and hey, Joanne, but if she was to follow everything I did, she would see these posts that I make about the falsetto and how that night kind of ruined any chance of me doing falsetto anymore. But I have been doing falsetto on some of the songs, and that is definitely outside of my comfort zone. Like, I don't listen back to it because I'm like, oh God, but you know, that was a big moment. Because if you think of like a woman just saying, giving you some probably decent advice, and all of a sudden you don't want to be in a band anymore, you don't want to sing anymore. That's quite an event for a musician who really wants to look. Of course, I wanted to be like a famous musician who was very good, but then things get smaller and smaller in your head. The ambitions, the ideals, and all those kind of things. So at that point, I just wanted to play in a band in some pubs, and even that had been taken away. So yeah, that's another thing. So stopping singing. The next one then, which would have rolled around maybe 2 or 3 years after that, was the breakdown. Look, I'm not going to go. This had to be added, obviously. I'm not going to go through it with a fine tooth comb. People who listen to the podcast regularly will know I gave up alcohol and cigarettes. 6 days later, I had a breakdown, and I've been recovering ever since, with diagnoses that have changed, with excuse me, with continued anxiety, continued stresses, trying to push through, find ways to heal. I was talking to a friend the other day who's having trouble kind of finding things to do with their life, and finding hobbies and people who share the same interest. How do we meet people when we're in our late 30s, early 40s? And there is all these questions because it does get harder. It's not like when you're 20 or something. It's, where you meet people out in the pubs and all that. Excuse me for a second, if you don't mind. I need to blow my nose. And I have to mute when I blow my nose because nobody wants to hear that because it's annoying me. Sorry. Apologies for that. But, it's about this thing of like finding the happy medium of what we like to do, and pushing out of our comfort zone. And, you know, this person, and we've talked like this is my friend. We've talked about this, and I've said to them, they might see me as boring and stuff, but I can say, oh yeah, I can understand why you might think I'm boring, but I find this joy in films, and I find this joy in books, and this peace and constant um search for calm, and search for knowledge as well, which you do, which you obviously, you're in books, that's what you're going to be trying to find it, with knowledge and things like that. And I guess their idea is being out and traveling to other places, but that's not comforting to me, and that's no way going to make me feel any way happy. I can't constantly be pushing the boundaries. I need to look after myself too. If I'm at a huge amount of anxiety every couple of days because I'm traveling here and doing this and doing that and putting myself out there, I fear for myself if I'm in those situations, because I know how stresses and strains what they can do to me, and I don't want that. So I do find that being in those moments, finding the things that you like to do, that's more important than running around trying to say, oh, well, but what about this? Maybe I like surfing. Maybe I like this. I can't do that. So this breakdown has pushed me on to like kind of greater things, but also pushed me on to realize that, a lot of my happiness is in the slowness of life, and, sit down and read a book for an hour and just try to unwind. It doesn't have to be all go, because when I'm going, it's so intense. I worry about everything, every detail. And that's not good. I can't do that every day, every second day. So the breakdown obviously is such a huge thing, but what has come from it, the kind of continued pursuit of wellness, um, obviously a pretty major event, possibly single handedly the biggest event that's ever happened in my life. Um, but and how much knowledge I've gained from it, I suppose, about myself and about other things and about what's good for me. Um, so yeah, I apologies if I can't fall in line and go to all these places with people and constantly on the move. I was at a wedding the other day and it was really nice ceremony and stuff like that. But it started at 2, it got to 9 o'clock. That I was just wrecked. I really was just absolutely exhausted and I needed to go. So, I stayed till after the speeches and then I headed off. And it was lovely to be invited. It's nice to be invited to anything, but you hit your point where, you've had enough of my body and it's time to go home. But, that's just knowing that's you find that out along the way. I mean, it's like, what is it, 14 years since it happened, the breakdown. So you learn a lot. Um, so like I said, leading up to that was the another huge event in my life was quitting alcohol. Like I said, when I gave it up and 6 days later I had the breakdown. I wonder, like, would I have given it up without the breakdown? Because I was constantly thinking about alcohol all the time. I was constantly thinking, will I drink tonight? No, don't drink tonight. Will I drink? Your head telling you, sure, why not? You might as well drink. Sure, there's nothing else to do. Blah blah blah. The internal monologue, the fight, the fight that you're going through with yourself about. I had this like hollowness if I didn't drink. That there was this hollowness in my chest, and I know I know now that that anxiety was part of that. And I know that what filled that hollowness was the alcohol because it takes away the anxiety. So it's like this vicious circle of being anxious about always wanting to drink, but then knowing that if I do drink, I will feel a little bit more complete and I won't be I feel as bad, I suppose, and feel, not sleep and lie there thinking about all these things. And I've thought about like alcohol since, and we were sitting there the other day, and like everybody around us drinking, having a great time. And I wouldn't like I was thinking like, do I miss it? And I don't like how could you can't miss like hangovers or uh, heartburn or a dodgy stomach like that. I constantly had to be eating Rennies to kind of help. Like it's not something you can miss. You can miss the feeling it gives you for those first 3 pints where you have that little bit of a warmness in your belly and a little bit of a buzz on. Um, and the way you can approach people and not feel full of like self doubt or question how people might think of you if you approach them. Like I think of that now as like someone who's sober, and go, I'm not going to approach that person in a pub or at a wedding or whatever it is because I'll come across looking stupid, and that person's going to be thinking, oh, what's this person want? Like, they're after something. They must have an agenda. So I think that feeling is nice that you don't have to think about all that. But then I think, what is the point in it? Like I don't know. Like maybe that is the point. The Dutch courage and the removal of anxiety and things. But like, what is really the point? Because I thought, like, I was talking to someone yesterday, and I was training with him in jiu-jitsu, and he had so it was Monday yesterday, so he had drank a lot. He told me on Friday, and he was still dying, and he was really struggling yesterday. He still murdered me, by the way, on the mats, just so people know, he still beat me up, but he was ruined afterwards. He said he was glad he came in, but it killed him, even though he was the one murdering me. By the way, it killed him. But I just, I got murdered for 5 minutes and jumped up and was like, okay, on to the next one. I know that the fact that I don't drink helps my body, helps my mind. So do I miss it? Not really like anymore. Even seeing other people drink, there's always that moment of envy. There's never a moment of like, maybe I'll just have a few today. I know that would be a very, very bad thing for me to do for many reasons I don't need to go into, but I don't miss it. I don't see the point in it anymore. I even see less of a point in weed or hash or anything like that. Even though I know at times that soothed me and relaxed me, I also know at times it made me rather paranoid and um what would be it's not even anxiety that I felt sometimes. It just felt I felt like this as if I was gonna like have a heart attack or something, proper full on fear. Um Without ever pulling a whitey, I suppose. So no, I don't miss it. But yeah, quitting alcohol, massive. Next thing, training. Again, I won't need to go into the details of this one, but it had to be put in. When I started running when I was like 30 years of age, I didn't realize that this actually gives you a high that weed can give you only healthy. This is a high that could like drink can give you only healthy. This is moment where you take to yourself and you run out and you go whatever it is, 12 kilometers. Okay, so that's what I'm running now. When you get back from that, like the power that this can give you, like this, it's an achievement, obviously, every time you do it. Um, but this runner's high, uh, being able to eat a bit more of the good things in life and not have to worry so much about, you know, what you're eating. You can treat yourself a bit more because all the calories you expend. Then, joining Fusion Training Center and just meeting Martin and obviously eventually meeting Keen and meeting Josh and the people I've met in there in jiu-jitsu and CrossFit, this like group of, people who go in and beat the shit out of each other for half an hour and then get up and shake hands and chat about whatever nonsense they did at the weekend. How do you get that? You don't get it anywhere. And I know people have talked about that. It's a real primal thing, and this men and all that, and it's not true because there's women in there as well. But it's more than just the idea of men like wrestle, that kind of stuff. It's not about that. Like, of course, some people go in for those reasons, and there's ego in there, and like they say, leave your ego at the door, but you still want to win. You still want to, or whatever winning means in training, but you still want to compete at a decent level against people. But if they get you and they catch you in a choke or something, they catch you in a choke. End of story. You tap, move on to the next thing. But how joyous is that? Like, just move on to the next thing. It's fine. It's not the end of the world. You'll catch them the next time, and then they'll tap, and then you'll move on to the next thing. Then start doing CrossFit and great like community over that side of the mats as well. Um, becoming a coach, or as Martin loves me saying, a facilitator. But regardless of what I feel that I am, I think I'm getting better at it. And I think I'm getting more comfortable in my skin, being in front of groups of people and even just shouting out, instructions. Like even that, raising your voice to a level where you're higher than anybody else around. So then you're in the spotlight. That to me has always been, regardless of anxiety or whatever like that. That's always been something I haven't wanted to do unless I was in a band singing or whatever. But stand in front of people talking, I think, is way worse than stand in front singing. And then finding this rhythm in my life where most of it does revolve around the gym because I obviously work there, but I train there more than I work there. I work there only a few hours a week, but I train there more hours a week than I work. But finding that rhythm of being there and trying to enjoy everything, like trying to enjoy that mixture of training and working, but all those different people who I've met and know things about now and I share my opinions of it and who listen to this podcast. It's an amazing to find a community like that. And like this podcast really couldn't have kicked on the way it did without them because they were the ones who shared them on their social media platforms, and they're the ones that it got the reach in the town, and then that went on to different things. Um, when I see the numbers of listens and stuff. It's or watches on YouTube. It's mad. So I needed to join in as my ninth event, the podcast. last time, last time I did a solo. Actually, let me just check, because this is when I go back on these people's names. I'm like, look at all these people who just like took their time out to just do something. Oh yeah, or to give them time to come on the podcast. So I did aspirations and stuff, and I bet myself up for. Sorry, beat myself up. That's terrible English, and I'm apologies to my father, who would correct me instantly on that. Um, I often think of like, what have I done? And when I was talking about that, I named some things that I had done, and I was corrected within hours of the podcast publishing by Cormac, uh, who has been, who was a brilliant guest before, and Joanne, who was mentioned before, also a brilliant guest on a couple of times. That I didn't mention the podcast as an achievement, and that was an oversight on my part, because it's hard to remember things like that when you're in the middle of it. There was no distance between it, so I was literally recording, or even when I was writing it, there was no distance, because this was for the podcast. So the ninth event I wanted to put in was the podcast, because can you imagine, like, I should say, can you imagine? Hold on one sec. It's thirsty work. I think of like 14 years ago, and I didn't want to talk to anyone. And now I talk to strangers once a week. In this, sometimes in this like stew of confidence or self-doubt and anxiety and previous triumphs, it's all in the pot. And I have to like contact someone and say, listen, can you come on and talk on my podcast and talk to me about mental health, or whatever you do, and we'll talk around mental health or whatever. Like, that is difficult for me. But then I need to set up the Zoom call. And then I would set up the Zoom call. The person comes up, right? The person pops up on the screen. This is for people who haven't been on the podcast. And I need to be confident and self-assured and feel that you are not wasting your time here. I want this podcast to be about you. Your name is in the headline. I want you to talk. I want this conversation to flow really well, and I want you to come away from taking something away from this, like I take away from every conversation. And that is all in my head. So what is in their head, But what I do find when I do come away from these conversations, like, we're looking, the pursuit is of a good conversation, and I'm going to learn, and other people are going to learn. But when I come away from these conversations, and like, it's amazing when I think of all the conversations I've had, how, like, apart from a couple of moments where there was wobbles, or moments of kind of silence that I didn't know how to fill, so I kind of said something, whatever came to my mind. It's happened so few times. Consider the number of episodes I've done and how many guests I've had on. And I should really count again how many guests, because we've had obviously over 100, but I don't know how many it is now. Considering that, how many we've had, like, how lucky I've been to have these exceptional people with this knowledge, that I could never have found out about otherwise. And people say, well, there's Wikipedia. Yeah, but there is Wikipedia. But I'm talking to people on their own experiences. It's not like Wikipedia. I could Wikipedia, when I had, just looking back, all right, Joanna Brook. I talked to Joanna Brook about, she's a professor of archaeology. Like, what do I know about archaeology? Very little. Could I go on Wikipedia and look up archaeology? Of course I could, but not from her perspective. And that's the whole point. So every week I'm having these conversations with people, and I just want my mom to know. I want Joanne to know. I want Cormac to know. I have this pride in this work, and this pride is reluctant, but it's there. And maybe I could do a whole episode of why. Maybe I should set up a new band and call it Reluctant Pride, because that could be on this T-shirt. That could be my motto. I find it hard to be proud of the things I've done, but I understand other people looking in why they feel I should be proud about it. And there is a sense of pride about it, but it's reluctant, as if I don't want to get ahead of myself. Um, so that's where we are now with all these episodes, all these guests. all these things that I've been through, like the 9 events, just going back over them, my parents' separation, discovering Nirvana, discovering drinking drugs, the Radiohead gig, stopping singing, like taking away my voice for a few years, my breakdown, quitting alcohol, finding training, setting up a podcast. 9 things that, like, I would challenge you to write down 9 things, events that changed everything for you. And you'd find them no problem. Like, not everything made the list. Like I said, the Beatles and 12 Angry Men would have been on here and something would have been taken off. And it would have been a shame to take something off because everything else was so important. I didn't want to do 21 events that changed everything. I wanted to keep it under 10. I was going to go with 7 because Magnificent Seven, Seven Deadly Sins, blah, blah, blah. But I couldn't leave certain things off. And I definitely couldn't leave the podcast off because of rightfully Cormac and Joanne pointing it out to me and my mom, obviously. Listen, I hope you enjoyed the episode. I hope that it got you thinking of like what 9 things changed everything for me, what 9 events changed everything for me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I don't always look forward to these solo ones that much. I enjoyed this one. I enjoyed writing and thinking back about certain things. So, thanks to everyone for joining me along the way as usual. I need to thank John for all his hard work. My mom, my dad, my granddad, Jaron Calvin. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, the Weekly Wheatley, Spotify, Apple Anchor, Google Podcasts, etc. All those things. Thanks for tuning in. And if you've done so on YouTube, I apologize for all the drinking and the blowing the nose and rubbing the nose. I definitely got like hay fever today because my nose is very, very itchy. Yeah, we'll be back with a guest next week. Who's it going to be? Who knows? Actually, do I know? I don't know. I think I do. I've been talking to a couple of people, so I don't. The dates aren't pinned down yet. All right. So listen, thanks everyone, and yeah, see you next week. Bye.